thank you all for registering and attending our first webinar, and our first webinar in collaboration with Henry. So we're delighted to be here, and thank you ever so much for your time today. We're delighted that Henry's joined us and he's going to be sharing his experiences around business growth, business stress, business sale, and also business leadership as well. We just want to start off with a little bit of data, if I may. So back in May, the Fortune 500 carried out a survey of their top CEOs, asking a number of questions, obviously around the current pandemic and the context of how it's hit business, and what they felt the impact of the current climate is. I was thinking it was going to be pretty pessimistic in terms of some of the data that came out, but it was pretty encouraging. 35.7% of the respondees said that capital spending will exceed 2019 levels in 2021. A third said that employment would increase in January 2021. And I think the really interesting fact is that 75% of the respondees stated that the effect of the coronavirus would actually accelerate the pace of their company's technological transformation and the deployment of that technology across all of elements of their business. So I think taking information away from that is, if nothing else, COVID-19 has been a real burning catalyst for businesses to utilize technology and really do some serious navel gazing to work out what structure their business was in pre-COVID and what it has to look like post-COVID as well. Given that was back in May, you know, we're nearly 2 months past that now, so it'll be quite interesting to see what the Fortune 500 data looks like when it's released again in a few weeks' time. So, of course, the pandemic's had a massive effect, be that good or bad, on all areas of business as well. You know, it's affected employment. Obviously, we're in the recruitment and search space, property, human interaction. Some businesses have had fantastic success. Some have been devastated by it as well. It's affected consumer behaviour. Whilst there has been some significant negativity around it, obviously not including the health piece, there's been a singular shift in flexible and remote working behaviours and the acceptance of that too now as the norm in business. There are a lot of success stories out there that go hand in hand with again with the negative elements as well. There are a lot of businesses that have had some fantastic days, weeks, months trading, especially in the e-commerce and fulfillment side of things, but also businesses that are poised, ready to kick off when lockdown measures are eased and they can resume normal trading depending on the sectors that they're in, travel, etc. So what Henry's going to talk about today is how you as leaders, as managers, owners, investors, etc., what can you do to plan and protect your business, strategize, and help your team and yourself in the months to come. So a few house rules. Everyone's going to be welcome to contribute to the Q&A, and we'll run that in the chat box after Henry's presentation, and we can obviously field some questions offline afterwards as well. So our contact details and Henry's contact details are on the placeholder there. Without more ado, I'd like to introduce Henry Fairpo to you, who's a C-suite partner and strategist. And he melds technology-driven transformation, finance, and business change together, instrumental in 2 successful international exits, instrumental in a major fundraise, and has got a phenomenal reputation within the PE world. We're delighted he's partnered with us today. So Henry, I'll stick myself on mute, and it's your show. Thank you.
Thanks, Damien. Appreciate it. And good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to see you all, or rather to know that you're out there. I have to admit, this is the very first time I've done a presentation, and one of my bits of preparation for it was turning off Alexa so that she doesn't try answering the questions for me, but could be useful later. Just very quickly on me, for those who don't know my background, as Damien says, finance background originally. I tend to get involved when businesses are at step change, and it's great fun on occasions. It can be quite interesting on occasions, but it's always rewarding. A lot of my time has been spent working with early growth stage tech-enabled businesses, And so sometimes I'm involved for months, sometimes I'm involved for years. Just depends on exactly what we're doing. And actually, the idea for this session came out of some of that when Damien and I were talking a little while back about the fact that, you know, while it's very extreme, the current situation with COVID has sort of a resonance of business as usual for me, in that, you know, working with these sort of businesses, I'm used to dealing with, you know, cash concerns, very restricted resources, a real need for a focus to get things done, need for rapid response, and a load of hard decisions, and of course a lot of time spent, you know, depending upon people. So a lot of those things, which are almost business as usual from my perspective, are probably actually extremely useful for everybody going forward when we're thinking about bouncing back. So today, actually the real star of the show is this man, General George Smith Patton Jr. Amazing guy. He was a real innovator. There's a cavalry sabre that he developed called the M913. He was one of the very first modern pentathletes and took part in the 1912 Olympics. He was a tank commander in World War I, and, you know, the odd thing, leading the 2nd Armoured Division, involved at Casablanca and in Sicily, a key character in Operation Fortitude and Operation Overlord, and at the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. On the other hand, he was quite good at getting himself into scrapes, and he was a world expert at bouncing back. Now, before we really go any further, I want to say, you know, something really important about what I'm about to talk about. Every single situation and every business is different. And, you know, the reasons why you need to do a bounce back, the issues that have led to that and you may face, the timescales that you have, the history that you're working from, and that starting platform will all be very individual. And I'm afraid, and it may disappoint people, but I don't have a one-size-fits-all solution to this. You might say there's no panacea coming, but occasionally I may try and open Pandora's box for you. Likewise, sadly, I can't provide everybody with a template or a nice little process flow that you can download at the end of the session, because sadly it doesn't work that way. But as Damien said already, you know, more than happy to talk either in the Q&A or outside this. So, all right, if that's not what this is, what is this session about? Really what I want everybody to be thinking about is the setting up of success. That's the most important thing here, the mindset that you need to be in and why that's different from business as usual, the approach to the whole exercise of doing a bounce back, finding what your necessities are, and actually getting yourself really prepared to deliver it. So what follows, personal views, as Damien said, based on personal experiences. So whatever you do, please don't blame Haig & Co afterwards. It's definitely my fault. So what are we going to go through? 4 sort of key topics, and then just a bit of a review at the end. So I want to have a counter through these areas in the company of the great general. Where am I starting? Well, I'm starting with people. It's not just because we're here today with Haig & Co, and thank you everybody for having us in this, but it's the fact that people is the real core of everything that you need to do a successful bounce back. So right back at the beginning, before you do anything else, you need to look around you and you need to do an audit. You need to think about the skill sets of your people. You need to think about the experience that they have or don't have, and the expertise that each of them brings. And I'd also say, whatever you do, think about the hidden strengths. As business leaders, we should all have insights into those hidden strengths, and they may even be things that those individuals themselves aren't really aware of. You need to understand, therefore, what it is you've got to work with. You know, what are the key tools here? What are the strengths? What are the opportunities? You need to think about how you're going to get them to work in teams and how to team them up for maximum impact. My experience is that on these occasions, people work together but you have to find a way to do it that allows them to get on with the job. So when you've done that sort of first bit of thinking, I use a little tool that I call Holes and Pillars, which is just writing down the key things that we're going to need. And I'm then looking at existence and importance. And that tells me where I've got holes in my team, where I've got strengths in my team. Where I've got holes in my team, I can look externally. I can talk to Hagen Co for starters. But it may be that actually from the wider network, there are skills that we're going to need and that we can use. But it's really important for me that we set up the people right, and we do that right at the start. It's seriously important. Now, the second of the General's quotes here is one that always resonates with me. We always talk about expecting the staff and expecting the people to come with us. It has to work the other way around. And what does that mean in a bounce back? It means being as transparent as you realistically can be. The point here being that there will be things that you can't feel that you can talk about, but try and talk about as much as possible. A bounce back is a stressful exercise for everybody, so it's worth being honest about it. Maybe not in quite the same terms as Patton was famous for doing on occasions, but it is really important. And that also, when you're setting those teams up, you give them the authority and you keep out of the way. As part of that, and as part of thinking about your team, it's worth remembering that extraordinary circumstances call for much more than just ordinary linear minds. Winston Churchill was great on this. He coined the wonderful phrase corkscrew thinking. It's the background to the special operations executive, and they were so vitally important to everything that happened in World War II. And if you don't know about SOE and you don't know about corkscrew thinking, I'd absolutely recommend trying to dig out some of the Ben McIntyre documentaries. Most of them seem to be up on iPlayer at the moment, and they are really very, very good. So the key point here is you need to have people who will challenge. You need to have people with differing views. The key is that you need an element of creative, positive tension in the team to keep it all moving forward. If you find you're surrounded by people who just agree with you, it probably says something. And in a bounce back, it probably says they're frightened. And therefore, my view would be talk to them, encourage them to stand up, encourage them to actually challenge and help build a real powerful solution. So we've looked at the people. What's next? Well, next is doing the planning. And what I'm going to say is plan like it's a military operation. But actually, that may not mean quite what you think it means in terms of the way it works. I'm really lucky. A mate of mine who's actually a co-founder in a business that I work with is ex-Sandhurst. And when he and I were talking about this, he put it down beautifully. He said the key point about a military plan is that you understand the choreography of your ultimate objectives, and that way you'll know how to respond when you meet reality face to face. The key for that is the word objectives. Understanding where you want to end up is so vital. It really is the key to all of this. My recommendation would be capture those objectives, stick them up on the wall, stick them on the screensavers, stick them wherever you can stick them so that you and everybody around you is aware of them and thinking of them all the time. Now, it really is the key to the rest of what I'm going to talk about. So the key thing here again is that plan will be really specific to your situation. If you think about it, a manufacturer is going to have all sorts of different problems from a service business. And even within that manufacturing, I mean, I noticed that one of the attendees here today is an old mate of mine. He's part of a business and they hand make guitar pickups. That's a very different set of challenges from a client I had years ago who used to make condensers for power stations. And different again from design companies technology companies or news services, for example. So again, this situation is going to be what actually is the objective? What does the news that Damien was giving us in terms of those stats, what does it tell us? I had this discussion with a colleague of mine only yesterday. We were trying to work out whether for the consultancy business, a V-shaped recovery is better news than a long L-shaped recovery. And what does it mean in terms of how we should position and what we should be doing? So the whole point here is that this planning is all about refining your understanding and refining your focus. I would certainly say start with the Simon Sinek why question. Why does the business exist? And from that, you can build your foundations. What I will also say is this plan may well be very different from what you had before. Now, I've been talking about a plan. What do I mean? Those of you who know me will know my views on plans, but I want to be very clear. In terms of a bounce back, a spreadsheet is never a plan. At the very best, a spreadsheet and a set of the world's most wonderfully complicated projections is only a validation of the logic of your plan. A task list or a Trello board with 1,000 tasks on it is not a plan. And that 250-page document that your funder thinks that they want and is insisting that you provide also isn't a plan. What it might be, though, and what they may really be after is evidence of the fact that you've done the thinking. Not one from Patton, but actually one of his fellow generals who went on to be President of the United States, Eisenhower, said, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. And in a bounce back, that's really true. It's back to that point around meeting reality when you see it and when you come up against it. And we'll see why on a chunk of that again shortly. So what is that plan? Well, it's all about those objectives. It's about understanding where you want to be. It's about understanding and absorbing all the intelligence that you've got about where you are and where you want to be. It's about setting the initial actions, and I'll explain why initial in a minute. And it's also about setting the early milestones or the check-in points. Now, a number of you from tech backgrounds are going to be going, hold on, he's talking about agile. Yeah, I am, absolutely. Agile is very, very real for bounce back, and that constant discovery, build, and test is exactly what we're talking about. So one or two other bits here. The general talks about never telling people how to do it, but telling them what to do. That's back to you set the objectives, you give the overview, you make sure everybody understands where you're trying to get to, and then you let them run with it. There's a challenge around this, and I think it's best summed up by the phrase, consensus is nice, but action is better. I think for me, that's really important, that plans for bounce back are action plans. They're not thinking plans. They're about what are we going to do? How are we going to get on with it? They need to be smart, as usual, but I'd focus on achievable and realistic. If your plan says we were originally, sometime in 2019, we thought 2021 was going to look like a £7 million year. Look at it again. Is it really a £7 million year? If you've been off for 6 or 9 months in 2020, then is it actually going to be a £5 million year? Or, as Damien was saying, has it been such a stonkingly good time that you're going to have to catch up with yourself and it might be a £15 million year? Set the timescales. Try and fail fast if you're going to fail. And also use the Tom Peters thing about ready, fire, aim. I know that's really counterintuitive for lots of us who've been in corporates in the past. But I can tell you from personal experience, if you do that fail fast and ready, fire, aim, it certainly eases the pain of taking hard decisions because you know you're going to be able to check up on them quickly. The other point I would say is mine that intelligence every day. Make sure you've got the best and most up-to-date intelligence you can. whether that's internal BI, whether it's external market information, whatever it is that you've got, and use it, but do check that it's real and do check that you haven't manufactured it. That's a problem that I see quite regularly in companies, is they go out to find information and it's not quite there, so they come up with something they think is about right, and that can lead you down all sorts of different paths. So there are lots of key things here, and a lot of it is about making sure that you are prepared. That's what the general meant when he said a pint of sweat will save a gallon of blood. Do it beforehand, spend the time, spend the brain power. Then when you get into the actual action plan delivery, you'll know where you're going to be. What are the key outputs? Well, key outputs from that planning for me are very simple. They're reconfirming those objectives. They're making sure what you've got up on the wall is what you need up on the wall. Alongside that, it's then a question of, to deliver that, what do I need? I've got my holes and pillars exercise here. You know, some of it might be people, some of it might be tools. If you're a manufacturer and you're trying to work out what on earth you're going to do in the current situation, you might well look at one of a series of tools that are out there. There are people like She Software who specialize in doing SaaS-based health and safety, who have lots of tools that can help you get there. But you need to make sure that you understand what each of those resources gets you, what you're achieving with this. And also, more to the point, when do I start to need each of those things? Because the next stage here is really simple. It's making sure that you have the provisions and your team is provisioned to do the delivery. You know, the general here is very simple. It doesn't matter how lofty your ambitions or how talented your team, without the right resources in the right place at the right time, you ain't gonna get there. Now, my background is in finance, so I'm generally the person who gets to deliver the bad news, and you just get good at that. I've also been a partner in an accounting firm, so it's always my fault, one way or the other. And it's not just because I'm a man, but there we go. But you have to be brutal, and you have to be brutally honest and brutally open, particularly with providers of those key resources, not just funders, but often it's going to be the funders. You really do need to say to them, we have to have this in order to keep things going. At the same time, do your utmost to manage the insatiable desire for updates and information that either you may have or others may have. I do have a little tip for you, which is, if you're finding that your funders are extremely keen on overly frequent updates, offer them an active role in actually doing the delivery. That way they can see directly, and either they'll come and join you, in which case you've got a whole new set of resources to use, or they'll probably keep out your way. But one way or the other, it is important because you need to get on with it. You don't need to spend more time in meetings than doing it. When you are doing provisioning, this formula is one that I think is really important to bounce back. Make sure you focus on need over risk. I know it's a very fluid situation, but if I'm honest, I do think that when we come to review the whole COVID approach, we may well find that risk concerns ran ahead of actual need. Now, that's a situation that's been built up over many years. It's been built up because of the nature of legislation and background and litigation and globalization and all of those things. But it is one of those things that in a bounce back situation, the general's right, you need to take those calculated risks. Now, you don't actually know till afterwards whether or not you've got there and whether you've got it right, but you have to take that step and get on with it. But think about need and make sure that you have what you need. This is a bit of real painful first-hand experience. I went into a business. I was asked to help do the plan. I fell into the classic consultant's trap. I wrote the plan. I got there. I got the framework in place, at which point the non-execs asked me to deliver it. The only challenge that I discovered when I got there was that there was really only 90% belief in the plan. We had to go to funders to get the right structure in place. They gave us 80% of the requested funding. The 20% we didn't get was the shock absorber I said that we needed. Because of that and a series of other bits of history, I only actually had 75% of my team's time, and there were some key skills and some key things that I didn't get to make use of to actually do things within the business. I also had a couple of non-execs who spent an awful lot of time eyeing up plan B or plan D or plan N or whichever plan it happened to be. And by the time I put that little formula together, which is effectively 90% belief times 80% of funding times 75% of the team times 20% of plan B, I was 100% stuffed. And so you really do have to insist and stick to it and seriously stick to it. And otherwise you have to adjust and do something very different. It really is a question of standing up. And it's a question for CEOs and CFOs, particularly, to be strong and say, we are only going to get there, and it's only actually worth doing it if we're going to do it properly and provision it. So, the challenge with planning and the challenge with drawing up that wonderful 250-page plan is, as the Prussian general von Moltke put it, no plan ever survives first contact with the enemy. And that's really the issue here. That's why you need to make sure that what you're doing is focusing on your objectives and not setting out a process. Processes are very dangerous in Bounceback because what happens is that people audit and follow the process. They don't look around them. They don't see what's happening. They don't take account of what's changing. And so you don't actually get there. The other key point here is very simple. 4 key letters. One of the managers who worked with me when I was a corporate finance partner got used to the fact that she would come in, sit down, say to me, I've been trying to think about what we should do here. I thought we ought to do, and there'd be silence, and then she would say, okay, JFDI. And JFDI is the key to this. You need to get on with it. But as a leader, while you're letting people get onto it, you have to keep out of that, keep the egos to one side, let it happen, but observe, 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 think, and then act. And that's really important. You need to make sure that you are not getting in the way of the actions. And when the general said a plan without action is just paper, being Patton, I really suspect he didn't use the word paper, probably used something else beginning with P, but it wouldn't have been paper. That's the key point here is, you can spend your time going around in academic little circles and you won't get anywhere. You've got to be out there. You've got to know what's happening. You've got to make sure you're supporting the team. I'm going to be slightly controversial here. I'm going to say I'm like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Not physically, I hasten to add, by any stretch of the imagination, but Arnie does not believe in plan B, and to be brutally honest, neither do I. There's only ever one plan A. You have to go for that. You can't be constantly wondering about what else. Now, there is a proviso with that, which is plan A will flex and it will change over time, but it will always be plan A. And I think that's the really important thing here is, if you're doing this sort of a bounce back exercise, you have to keep believing, you have to keep going back to those objectives, you have to keep checking them, you have to keep looking at the wall frequently and regularly and knowing where it is that you're trying to get to. And that brings me on to the 3 R's, which are review, rinse and repeat. And this is why the milestones bit in that planning is so important. At the milestone, you need to be saying, where are we, as opposed to where we expect it to be. What does the current view of the road forward look like? Is there something going on ahead there that I wasn't expecting? Can I see a very strange looking bush in the distance that I wasn't expecting to see? And what's the new intelligence? What are my scouts telling me? What's the new information that I've got that will allow me to refine? And yes, I'm back to Agile again. It is absolutely that Agile model. But the key thing about Agile is you're always still on plan A. So all this for me is about how you get to success. And I think I would put 4 things down here: clear objectives, having the right people in the right roles at the right time, being properly resourced for need and not risk, and making sure you are properly and fully backed to deliver against those objectives. And that's what the general meant. Success is how high you bounce when you hit the bottom. That's it. Damien, back to you.
Henry, fantastic stuff. I'm loving the military theme. I think you certainly have got a passion there as well, but also there's some fantastic quotes from those esteemed military leaders as well. So I'm going to open it up now. So please do feel free to ask Henry any questions. Open up the Zoom chat. The messages will be visible to all, so be nice. But please, if there's anything that you want clarification on or want to quiz Henry on in terms of his experience, please drop a few questions there.
I think, Damien, while people are doing that, we did actually have one up front, which was a really interesting question around use of collaboration platforms.
Yeah.
Question was basically using online collaboration platforms already, but COVID has actually meant that we're accelerating, transforming the way we're actually working with people and the collaboration and service delivery elements. And interested in my views on what can be done in that area to differentiate and whether you can build on it as a real differentiator from competitors. And I think the answer is yes, absolutely. I think there are an awful lot of collaboration platforms out there. There are some absolutely fascinating leading edge bits of tech being used in that area. One of my longtime friends, former colleagues, is chairman of a business called Masters of Pi, which is actually using augmented reality to create collaboration workspaces, working with some big engineering companies on some really interesting projects. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. I don't think there's any doubt that while there will be a drift back to offices, we're absolutely going to see more collaboration there. I think the real thing is making sure you've got the right tools and that those tools do what you need. Again, challenge here is going to be, if you are a manufacturer, those collaboration tools are going to be very different from if you're a design business. And there's a challenge here about the difference between, as it were, a passive collaboration, and I'm thinking of something like Slack, for example, and an active collaboration tool that really properly replaces a whiteboard or that ability to sit around a table. I think there's some work to do in that second area. I know there are some early tools out there and some interesting ones, but there's a really interesting challenge around how you integrate the teams properly when people work remotely. So I do see it's a really good idea from that perspective, but I think there's a long way to go. Yeah.
Thank you, Henry. We've got a few questions coming through now. So I'll go to Dan Jones. Thanks, Dan, for asking this. What's your advice on implementing financial governance to agile projects?
Yeah, that's always a good one. I mean, there are a number of tools out there. Atlassian's tools are probably the best known. Atlassian's tools are probably the best known in those. You can link those across and you can link them into financials. But it is an interesting challenge because you have the budget point around if it's flexing, how's it flexing? But for me, that financial point has always been part of the framework that Agile works in. So Agile isn't just something that allows you to run on forever. And actually you have to set ground rules. As a very, very senior designer once said when we were talking about some of these things, actually that's quite useful. If I'm building a house, it's really handy for me to have a fairly good idea what the floor print needs to be and what rooms you want, because otherwise I've no idea where I'm going to start to build. So for me, that financial point is part of that. You need some internal measures to be able to capture the costs that are going along the way. But it is definitely, there are tools out there. I would make sure that you're using them. You need to have a fairly good modern accounting system on the other end to help you. But absolutely tools out there, and I would use those tools. The other point, of course, is this is personal bigoted opinion, as my very first chairman used to say. I hate finance departments. I love insight departments. So for me, part of the job of finance, if you like, or of insight, is to help in making sure that we know where we are and that we're actually focused on delivering the value in those agile projects. So that's a key aspect from that point of view.
Yeah, I think echo that piece around the insight side of things. Ever since the credit crunch, the term business partner is evolved and created, especially within finance. That those BPs have been ensconced within operational departments, sales departments, whatever it might be. The finance animal has changed and evolved massively, and I think that insight piece is absolutely critical. You need to have a snapshot on a roadmap, again, in economically troubled times, finance is a mainstay. Finance is the team that the business relies on to steer them through those choppy waters. So 100% agree there. I'm going to go to Scott Dale. Hello, Scott. Thank you ever so much for joining us. Thanks, Henry. Interested in the psychological bit too. Absolutely on point, Scott. What are your top bullet points for getting people to emotionally bounce back and get to a place where they can pick themselves up and believe in your plan?
Yeah, that's a great one. Actually, let me link another one into that as well, Damien, which is that Greg Morrill asked a question about the point that failing fast can make it look as if you're flitting from one thing to another. The two things are very closely linked. For me, it's a question of setting it up, Scott. There's an element here that's around how you communicate, the fact that you do it frequently, the fact that you are as transparent as you can be, but at the same time that as leaders, we are actively setting up those opportunities for success and actively showing that we believe, even though we recognize the challenges that are out there. And I think it's being honest and being passionate about it together is the bit that's really important. And some of that is setting out very clearly what you do. When we were looking at the one that I struggled with, one of the key things that we did, and we did it every week, was that we had a session. We would talk about where we were, what we were doing. It was my job as effectively chief reconstruction officer, or whatever you want to call it, effectively to lead those and to let people see where we were and where we were going. So it's back to me again to set out those objectives. And as part of that exercise, Greg, I think my view is it all depends on how you set it up. In Anderson's, when I trained in Anderson's many years ago, there was a wonderful phrase which was fail forward, which was basically meant it's not a blame culture. It's actually about learning and moving quickly on and making sure that it's better the next time. I think about Amazon whenever I think about fail fast. Amazon has a policy whereby it tries to do something like 1,500 updates a day to the Amazon website, which is an astonishing level. But it does them on the basis that it rolls them out, it monitors them. If they're not working, it takes them down and it tries a different route. If we go back to the military scenario or the sort of analogy here, if you send people out and they come across an unexpected group of the opposition, you expect them to come back and go another way. It doesn't mean they failed. It means that they've tested something and it's not optimal, so they're going a different route. The key point is that it's not a question of the process that says you must keep going no matter what happens. That's the First World War failure as opposed to the Second World War success.
Fantastic. Thanks, Henry. Any more questions from anyone? Give them 20, 30 seconds to get typing. If not, I'll finish on a question to you all.
I see there was a question again from Greg to both of us.
Oh, yeah.
the answer, Greg, on this one, which is the question is the priority always to deal with the situation as you find it and the people that you've got, or do I more often look externally? It really depends on timetable, and it really depends on what I've got. You know, if the timetable's short, or if I've got a strong team, I won't look externally. But if I can see there's a really obvious hole, then I will absolutely recommend or go out and do that bit in terms of trying to find the right people. I guess, Damien, it'd be interesting to know from your perspective in terms of when people are coming to you, which of those situations are you generally getting? Are you getting the status quo needs an update, or it's panic?
Interesting one. So I think it sort of depends on the sector that we're having those conversations within. But even those sectors like e-commerce, fulfillment, etc., that are having absolutely fantastic times, or at least good year-over-year comparisons, they're still experiencing a huge amount of stress and change because of the pandemic. So it's a different operational viewpoint, really. I think where we see some of the stress and the panic is from I've spoken about this with a number of people I don't know, on the webinar, but everyone's talking about the F word. No one's talking about the R word. And when I'm talking about that, is the F word is obviously the furloughing piece, but no one's talking about the restructuring and the redundancy side. And so in the social media and the news at the moment, when people are saying such and such business is doing a 10% restructure or decimation of their workforce, of course they're going to be doing that, because the furloughing is simply just a limbo, a pause button for those businesses to actually continue to survive and put plans in place. So there are going to be some huge sort of inverted commas sort of panic stations that are going to be taking place. But I think you have to step back from that, take the emotional element out of everything, and ensure that your plan is as rock solid as possible and flexible moving forward. The people piece is going to be a massive part of that. And I'm not saying this just because we're a recruitment search business, but the headcount side of things now is moving more towards interest in interim and contract workforce as opposed to FTEs. Whether or not that's just the fear of putting those FTEs on the balance sheet as a fixed cost, I don't know, but there is that. There's a greater appetite now for interims, which might play into the fact that people are looking less panicky and looking more for actual resource and talent within that as well. Over to Carol. Carol says, where Plan A is risky, how do you manage the HR conflicts as far as transparency goes?
Oh boy, yeah. I guess I'm interesting. I would tend to overshare, which is probably not great on occasions with HR. But fundamentally, where I have in-house HR, I will bring them in. They're a key part of right from the start, from that first audit point all the way through. I'm bouncing it off them. I'm bouncing the messages off them to make sure we're trying to manage that. And I think the other point is that quite often, your point's right, your plan is always going to be risky because it's a bounce back. If we knew what was going to come out the other end, it would be great. So it is that point. You just have to be as transparent as you can be, but you have to be as honest as you can be as well. I've found, my experience is that very rarely are people surprised if you have, in the end, to give them sort of the bad news that Damien's just been talking about, so long as you've actually prepared the ground for that. And I've known, the most extraordinary thing I've known was in one business where we were trying to move from loss-making to cash positive in a quarter, which we achieved. It's an interesting challenge, but we were very open about what the redundancy risk looked like. And we actually had somebody come to us and say, I was intending taking 6 months off. I want to do that anyway. So if it saves somebody else's job, I'll do it now and not in 3 months' time. And you do get that. It is extraordinary how you do that. Get that. And it's that point simply around, if you are open and honest, people tend to respond. I don't know whether you've seen anything different, Damien, on that.
No, I think the HR piece is quite an interesting one. And again, probably aligns nicely to my comment around the business partner. The HR business partner role, again, has evolved over the last decade. Like estate agents and recruiters, HR people and professionals have got an unfair reputation in my mind. There are some phenomenally capable HR enablers within businesses that we worked with. Absolute top talent. I think in any profession, there are going to be some absolute superstars, and they're the ones that will engage and help you with the message, etc., and the management side of things. It's where the taskmasters and the process kings and queens come into play. That they can't do it because of it's always been done that way, etc., etc. So I think seek out the ones that, in all levels of operations and professional. Align yourself with those allies, to use the military analogy, to push that plan forwards as well.
Sorry, Damien. I was going to say I would just be interested as well to know, just on that point, and it's a semantics one. Are you seeing fewer HR people and more heads of talent, or more actually heads of people these days?
So the heads of people or people director titles, they're coming to the fore over the last 3-4 years or so, and you've got the heads of talent, which tend to be sort of internal recruitment functions, which are supporting structure, growth, etc. But I think those sort of heads of talent or people directors tend to be very much aligned, not necessarily from a HR point of view, but very much business and operations focused. But directly relevant to the people side of things. So a little bit vague sort of summary there, but they're coming to the fore more, I think.
Yep.
Question from Lee. Hello, Lee. Hope you're well. How do you win hearts and minds around the plan and manage conflicts of interest between different departments?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I think the answer is, in the same way you do with everybody else, you try and sell the vision. You do what you can. As I say, consensus is nice, but on occasions you just have to get on with it. And I didn't include it, but the general had one on this as well. He has one for everything. He said, lead me, follow me, or get out of my way. And in the end, in a bounce back, that's what you broadly have to do. There comes a point where, as leaders, the real inner leadership team has to be united. If you can't stand behind the plan, keep out the way and let other people get on with it. But that's the key from my point of view. And it's back to that real core little group in the middle of the CEO, probably the head of people, the COO and the CFO. It's those roles that are all about it. Everybody needs to go out and do it themselves. Now, there may be occasions on which you don't get cabinet unity, but you do your best to project a single unified image. On that one, if you're ever listening to a politician, and particularly if you're ever listening to a politician during an election, if they say, I believe, they mean it. If they say the party's policy is, they don't. And therefore, I'm always very careful not to talk about, well, our policy on this one is, because I know what that implies. So sometimes you have to psych yourself up, get out there, and play the role. And sometimes you just have, as a leadership team, to say to people, look, you're in the way, step out the way, we can come back to it later.
Yeah, fantastic. We're going to wrap up there, guys. So thank you so much for your time, but I'm going to throw one question back to you, and again, if you can respond in the chat box. We've got a time machine. We're 6 months down the line, coming to the end of 2020, and I'm sure a lot of you will be glad in that respect, and looking forward to 2021. On a scale of 1 to 7, just so that no one can sit on the fence here, 1 being a pretty poor rating, 7 being top banana. Where do you think we will be from a bounce back point of view? So be interesting to see people's sentiments and thoughts on that. So if you could just put a quick rating down, that would be very interesting. Oh, Mark, nice. David, nice and reserved there. Great, Stephen, thank you. Well, thanks, Ben. Yeah, Mel, I agree. Winners and losers always. Yeah, quite a lot of 4s, a few 5s. And thank you, Carol. That's wonderful. I will catch up with you very soon. Oh, did you, Stephen? Apologies, I missed you on the Q&A bit.
Yeah, there are a couple on the Q&A, Damien. Stephen's a very, very kind comment. Cheers. And Mark Stone also asked a quick question about...
Oh, really? I apologise.
No, don't worry. Don't worry. Don't worry. Yeah. I think, to be honest, if Mark, if you're still on, I think that's probably one for you and I to discuss offline, because there's a load in your question around funding, cash risk, and new businesses looking and feeling different. I think that's a separate topic for another day, I suspect.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stephen, apologies, I can't see your question on my chat list at all.
It's on the Q&A. It's on the Q&A.
Oh, it's on the Q&A. It's on the Q&A.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, you see, you've got these professional Zoom users, not like me, unfortunately. Can I ask Henry, can you catch up with both Mark and Stephen offline on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you ever so much for attending, everyone. It has been our first webinar. It's been interesting to set up, but thank you ever so much to Henry. Your time and insight on this has been very, very interesting. So the webinar will be recorded, so I'll get a link sent out to everyone who has attended and also registered as well. So thank you again, and I'm sure I'll be catching up with you guys over the next week or two. All the best. Cheers.
Thanks all.